Bateman is among the world's leading painters of wildlife and of nature generally. Born and raised in Ontario, he spent 20 years as a high school teacher of art and geography before becoming a full-time painter in 1976. Since then, he has traveled widely, painted ceaselessly, published a number of highly successful books, drawn record-breaking crowds to his one-man shows in such museums as the Smithsonian Institution, been the subject of numerous films and video productions, received several honorary doctorates, and become an officer of the Order of Canada. Robert Bateman is also a globally respected spokesman for ecological and environmental causes, and has contributed artworks that have raised millions of dollars for these causes. In 2007, he and his wife Birgit donated art and artifacts valued at more than $11 million to Royal Roads University in Victoria, British Columbia. This collection will be housed in a Robert Bateman Centre dedicated to education, dialogue, and research on sustainability. Bateman traces his profound connection to the natural world back to his childhood encounters in the ravines of his native Toronto. He believes passionately in the importance of connecting children to nature at an early age. We talked in his studio on Salt Spring Island, British Columbia. Can you tell me a little bit about what it's like to look at natural phenomena through your eyes?
Right. Well, I started out being a nature painter when I was a kid. All little kids like to paint, when they're little kids, and all little kids like nature. But most normal human beings grow up around the age of 12 or 13 and go on to more mature things, and I just have not yet reached that stage. I guess it's too late. I'm not going to grow up now. And so I got serious when I was 12, and I was doing little pictures of birds, and mostly birds and mammals, and kind of portraits with a bit of habitat, which is sometimes what I do now, certainly habitat. And then when I was around 18, a much more mature friend, he was 20, he was very grown up, he said, "You can't do real art with a small brush." He was at the Ontario College of Art. He said, "You have to get a big fat brush and slap on the paint." Well, I was 18 in 1948, and so if you're not as, well, hardly anybody's as old as I am, but if you're not of a certain age, you can look in a book and see what was going on in 1948 in the art world. Picasso was the darling of the art world. The Impressionists were well established, in the Post-Impressionists, Van Gogh and Matisse, not a Post-Impressionist, but the abstract artists were starting to come in. And so I became an Impressionist and a Post-Impressionist and an abstract, basically a Cubist, then finally an abstract Expressionist when I was 30. So all during my 20s. And so it's a long-winded way of answering your question. I started seeing the world as abstract patterns of color, form, shape, sometimes very strong contrast, sometimes no contrast at all, just something that's very, very subtle, like some of Whistler's paintings and so on. And so that's my primary motivation for starting a painting, for getting a thought and an idea, is the lighting and the shape and the forms in it, that this would make a good piece when it's all put together. And it's virtually always has to do with nature, and virtually always, therefore, it has a bird or a mammal in it.
You know, I think a lot of people will be surprised by that. I know Alec Colville a little bit, and I've seen some of his studies, and the studies always involve lines and geometry, and there's a real patterning and shaping that has nothing to do directly, immediately, with what he's actually going to paint. And I take it you'd be doing much the same sort of thing, seeing the pattern first and then filling in. The same sort
of thing. I'm fairly familiar with Alex Colville's work. I've got books and been to his shows and so on, and I'm a great admirer, incidentally. But I'm not nearly as geometric, or I guess I'm more intuitive. I sometimes think women's intuition also applies to men, and certainly applies to artists and writers and musicians and so on. I get an intuitive feeling this is a good thought. Like I had one that just springs to mind was we were in the Serengeti, because I love going to East Africa, down near Lake Ndutu, for those that have been there. and saw this scene. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning. It was an empty, dried up lake bed. Lake Ndutu had more or less dried up. And there was a lone baby wildebeest all by itself at a distance, standing there looking at us. Now that wildebeest had made 2 mistakes. It was just born at 8:30, and this was 11 o'clock in the morning, and so it wasn't all that smart, but it didn't realize it's supposed to stay with its mother. And also, it didn't realize when the herd moves on, it's supposed to move on too. And so here it was all alone, had no idea where the herd was, and we had no idea where the herd was. And so it will be a hyena snack before sunset. But he doesn't know it. So in a sense, he's lucky that way. But I saw this image, which was very poignant, because we know he's gonna die, and he's an innocent little newborn. By the way, a friend of mine, George McLean, another wildlife artist, said, Bob, he made 3 mistakes. He was born a wildebeest. And they don't quite go all the way to the top as far as the brains goes. And so I saw this, and then an image came to my mind of what to me maybe my favorite movie, Lawrence of Arabia. And David Lean, one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived, had this incredible composition of an empty desert and an empty sky, and then there's a dot. And anybody who's seen the movie knows what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. No, maybe it's not a dot. Yes, I think it is a dot. Maybe it's a mirage. No, it's a dot. If it's a dot, it's some living thing, and it's getting bigger. And it was Omar Sharif on his black horse riding up to the waterhole. But that is quite a long shot and quite a stunning image of the emptiness of the space and that simple dot. So that's intuition. See, that's how that thought came to me, and I could go through chapter and verse of many of my paintings. Most of my paintings come to me with some kind of flash like that I wouldn't have expected 10 minutes earlier.
But suddenly you just see it.
Yeah, suddenly, but it's because of the life I've lived and everything I've seen and everything I've experienced. In some cases, because I was an abstract artist and I'm influenced by abstract painters, especially one abstract expressionist called Clifford Still, who does great big, sort of organic, flat shapes. And he has one of a great white dash going down and a couple of white blobs on a sea of brown, and there's some other things. And as soon as I saw a waterfall plunging down in, I think it was Glacier Park in Montana, I said, I got to do a painting of a plunging waterfall and 2 white mountain goats. So that became my mountain goat painting. And I have to credit Clifford Still with the idea, but if Clifford Still ever thought that Bateman, the wildlife artist, was using one of his paintings for his idea, he'd roll over in his grave. All those guys have died now, by the way. That great school of abstract expressionism is part of art history now.
Mm-hmm. What made you move from abstract expressionism into wildlife? Or going back to where you were, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I had an epiphany. See, so many of these things are spiritual and emotional. So pretty well during my 20s, up to around the age of 30, 32, I was going through different stages of more painterly, capital A type art, where I was getting further and further and further away from the subject. And at the same time, however, I was almost a militant naturalist. I was on the board of the Federation of Ontario Naturalists. I was going around giving lectures and talks to nature clubs and rotaries and that sort of thing on nature subjects. And I was teaching teachers how to take kids out into nature, and also taking kids out into nature, including my own kids, of course. And so here I was painting nature with big globs. I was always painting nature, by the way, and usually painting in the plein air, as the French say, painting directly in the field like Tom Thomson did, but still doing abstracts. And yet I was leading people around saying, what really is important is particularity. What really matters is the particularity between a sugar maple and a red maple and a mountain maple. And you have to know the names of these things, or we never have a hope of protecting biodiversity. I'm really big on knowing names. of things. And I don't know if I'll come back to the topic of the way the world is going this way, but it's said that the average youngster in North America can recognize over 1,000 corporate logos, but they don't know the names of 10 neighbors of other species. You know, that's a Douglas fir, and that's a red alder, and you know, that's a West Coast red cedar, etc. And that's a Steller's jay, and so on. So I was saying how important it was to know particularity. Does the bill of the gull have a black dot on it, in which case it's a ring bill, or a red dot on it, in which case it's probably a herring gull? So you have to get into particularity. You can't show particularity with a big fat brush slapping it on. You need to bring out the small brush once in a while. So my paintings now still have, I hope, the abstract quality, the big shapes and forms, and the three-dimensionality that the group of seven had, the rhythms going through it and so on. That's part of my psyche, so that comes automatically. But also it has the particularity, so you would be able to identify the species if you knew your grasses of grass, or the species of tree if you knew your tree bark that the pileated woodpecker is sitting on, for example. So particularity is extremely important to me, and I think it should be important to everybody. And so I had this schism between Bateman the artist and Bateman the naturalist, and they were getting further and further apart. And then I went to a show by Andrew Wyeth, the great American realist who just passed away recently. And he went through, he admired some of these abstract painters, but he went through all that phase, and he didn't sort of buckle under and start working in all different styles. He knew what he liked and what he wanted, and he stuck to his guns, and he only painted the area around Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, and the area around Cushing, Maine, where his family would always summer. And when you went, so I went to an Andrew Wyeth show in 1962 at the Albright Knox Gallery in Buffalo, a very fine little art gallery with superb modernist collection. They've got Jackson Pollock and a great Clifford Still collection, and they got some Picassos and Matisse and a nice little Van Gogh, etc. And so I think it was the first show in the history of Western art in a major modern art museum in the 20th century of realism. Now that's kind of a sweeping statement, but roughly from the year 1900, what was happening in art was subject matter was becoming less and less and less important, and the surface of the canvas was becoming more and more important, and just the paint. And you asked an abstract artist, what is it? He would say, it's a painting. You'd say, it's a painting of what? He'd say, it's a painting, it's paint, get it? Well, it's a painting of what? It's not a painting of something, it's just paint. You don't look at a Persian carpet and say, it's a Persian carpet of what? It's a Persian carpet. You don't look at a butterfly's wing and say, it's a butterfly's wing of what? So if you can appreciate a Persian carpet or a butterfly's wing, why can't you appreciate a painting? So that's a very valid philosophy. It's just paint. But just paint isn't enough for me because I'm a naturalist. And so that night it was my road to Damascus. Just like, if you know your Bible, just like Saul falling off his horse on the way to Damascus, I kind of fell off my abstract horse. It took me about 2 years to get out of my abstract snobbery and feel it was okay. I started tentatively doing it, and by the age of 32 I was fully into what I'm doing now, and it's the only style. People sometimes say, well, you're going to change your style. No, realism and particularity is the only style that suits a naturalist.
Isn't that fascinating that you felt that disjunction between what your painterly self was doing and what your... Right,
yeah. I would do these bold abstract paintings, and they'd be all over very quickly, and I'd sort of sit back and, oh, that was kind of fun. Is that all there is?
Yeah.
Yeah. Peggy Lee was coming out with that song at the same time. Is that all there is?
Somebody said to me, there's a Where's Waldo theme in a lot of your work, where there's something that's tucked away for the close observer, and
the naturalist in me knows that a way more birds and mammals, and for that matter, snakes and skinks and praying mantises and everything, sees you than you see them. They're out there, and as you're passing by, walking through nature, they're seeing you, but they are not going to reveal themselves. So the normal thing for wildlife is to not be obvious, not be out there front and center. And a certain part of me has a little bit of aversion to the kind of obvious, well, for example, Field and Stream cover like a target white-tailed deer that's standing there proudly. Now, I've done proud, obvious, big animals, but I consider myself an ecological painter. So how does the animal fit into the habitat? And I think I always make the habitat suit the creature. And a lot of the time, I don't want the creature to be obvious. I want the habitat to dominate. So it's not so much a game I play with the viewer. One or two artists do like to play games and have hidden things and that sort of thing. It's not so much that, although it's okay to play games once in a while too.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's it's really placement of the animal, or
emphasizing the ecology and how the animal fits into the environment.
You've done a whole book on habitat.
A children's book on vanishing habitats, because I guess anyone who pays attention knows that hunters, for example, are not shooting animals is not a great threat to the species. There are some obvious exceptions, like the passenger pigeon, when they used to darken the skies and they shot them and fed them to the pigs by the wheelbarrow full, wagon full. They were wiped out by hunters, and the hunters tried to do the same thing with the bison, the American bison or buffalo. And but it's the farmers, especially the big agribusiness farmers. They're the big threat to wildlife. So it's habitat destruction. If you have no place to live and no place to feed, then you're doomed.
You have some very strong feelings about education, which is where what I thought about when I saw that book on vanishing habitat. That really is an educational book for young people.
Yes.
Tell me about how you feel about education and what you think it should be doing.
I got a lot of opinions on education.
You started as a teacher.
Yeah,
right?
I was a teacher before I was a teacher. I guess one of my faults, I suppose, is I just love to share things and share ideas. You probably notice in this interview I tend to be more loquacious than succinct. And I love to tell stories, and I'm getting more so. And my family accuses me of telling long stories. And then a friend of ours from Barcelona said, "No, Bob, you don't tell long stories. You just tell very wide stories and get off in all different directions." So I actually started teaching when I was 16 because I got turned on to all of this because my mother sent me to the Royal Ontario Museum, junior field naturalist. And I can't remember whether it was the age of 8 or the age of 12, but somewhere in there. And immediately I felt at home. All the kids were interested in nature, and all the leaders and the museum staff people were my kind of species. And so when it came time to get kicked out, when you sort of get well into puberty, at the age of 16, you can't be a junior field naturalist anymore. And I was missing it, so I asked if I could go back and be an instructor. So I was a teacher kind of from the age of 16 or 17 of the little kids at the Royal Ontario Museum. And I taught Sunday school a little bit too, and I started teaching though in high school. And I taught steadily for 20 years. And I enjoyed the whole thing because I just like to share ideas. But I enjoyed the whole thing, but I was observing all the time as what was going on in high school and what was going on with young people, and the way the kids were learning and they were being educated, but they weren't being educated in the classroom. They're being educated on television, and to a certain extent in the schoolyard. But a lot of it was being educated by the culture that was being promoted, the culture of turning kids into, what I call them, Homo sapiens teenager consumerensis, turning kids into self-indulgent consumers, which is the main role that young people have in our society, is to go shopping. That's the greatest contribution they can make. Well, it used to be back in the days of your parents and my parents, if a 16-year-old kid broke his arm on a farm, then it would show up on the table. They couldn't plow the back 40 perhaps then. The kids had meaningful lives. There's a recent book I just read by a brilliant and famous British educator, John Abbott. It's called Overschooled and Undereducated. And he believes we need more experiential learning, having kids doing stuff, not looking up stuff on Google or looking up stuff in a textbook, but going and doing things. And he kind of got into this way of thinking. He was teaching in a boys' school in England, and he took a group of boys years ago to visit an Iranian village. It must have been the days of the Shah, because I don't think the Ayatollah would go along with that. So it was a long time ago, and it was a remote, mountainous Iranian village. And his young British teenagers were there living in the village with the villagers and studying them and so on. And after a week or so, one of the elders came and spoke to John Abbott and said, I've been wondering, these young men you have here, they're tall and healthy and good looking, and they seem to be really nice and really well behaved. My question is, why are they so useless? He went, duh, that's right. The elder went on to say, when our kids are 3 years old, they're herding chickens. And by the time they're 6, they've graduated to herding goats. And we give them more and more responsibilities that matter to our village and to our way of life, and everyone makes a contribution. We've designed a society. It's not the teenagers' fault. We've designed it this way. Nowadays they not only just go shopping, it's their duty to amuse themselves. And who would have thought gaming was a verb? I've heard of playing games, but now gaming is almost a way of life with a certain element of our youth. So I'm not going to take time now unless you want me to, because I could go on and on. If I were king of an education system, say in Canada, I would dump high school education. Elementary school, I'd leave it pretty well the way it is. And I would have the kids spend, I'm into it a little bit now. I did a pie graph. I actually got a website, batemanideas.com. I think I wrote about it in detail there. It's a pie graph. 3/4 of the kids' time is not in a class, not in school. 1/4, they're out having adventures in nature in small groups. Homo sapiens evolved in small bands or groups. And I would think 15 to 20 is the ideal size. That's why gangs they're just a natural thing for kids who are neglected and underprivileged. They gravitate to gangs. It's a normal, natural thing. We should encourage it, but we should have excellent role models as leaders. And I would recommend grad students just like some do national service in other countries. They do their service, but they get paid a certain amount to be excellent role models for these small groups. And they go around and have adventures, possibly take risks. They'd go out in nature, they'd go on camping trips and so on, but they'd also help as service to the community, help old folks' homes and help in parks and, just be helpful. So that's 1/4. Another 1/4, it would be the opposite. The kids would be all alone in the adult world. If they're interested in working as a biochemist, they go in a biochemist's lab. interested in working in stocks and bonds, they go to Bay Street or Howe Street or wherever it is they'd be going. Maybe they're just sharpening pencils, but they're observing what the real world is like. Another quarter would be a guru system where the kids, we give credits and pay experts, ballerinas, perhaps a retired astrophysicist, maybe a wildlife painter, maybe whatever the kid thinks he'd like to do. And so they go and they actually spend time with a guru, kind of sitting at his feet, talking to him, trying stuff that he does or she does or whatever it is, and kind of becoming specialists in that area during the 4 years of high school. Then the other quarter is very dear to my heart. It would be memory work, learning facts about our culture and our life and our world. I'd have them learn the names of their neighbors of other species. I'd have them be able to recognize the difference between Tchaikovsky and Debussy and Ravel and the Rolling Stones and et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? Spread out because these kids now, they're all programmed by what the current thing is on TV. Whatever Madonna's doing or whoever is I guess Madonna's now passé, but whoever the current one is, then that's all they know, and that's all they care about, and they spend all their time worrying about the affairs that celebrities are having, and I think it's really important they would know the difference between Rembrandt and Vermeer and Picasso and Matisse. And so, and by the way, I put this into practice when I was a teacher, and I had terrific success by lecture and slide identification and memorization, and the kids loved it, believe it or not. And every kid got 90 or 95% in the tests, and I tested them. I would never let them go near an art gallery or any field trip without having given them a whole course in it and a test. And they all got really high marks because I reviewed over and over and over again. They were very excited and enthusiastic. And I remember this same Albright Knox gallery, I saw the Wyeth show, taking a group of kids there. And the docents they'd never seen high school kids like this before. The kids were running in, wow, hey Paul, there's a Jackson Pollock, and there's a Mark Rothko, hey, come on over here. And they would, but see, I brainwashed them. And I think and hope they're still brainwashed. I know this is a real brag on this topic, and then I'll let it go. I had one kid who went through my art history course. I sprinkled art history, mostly studio, but maybe a quarter of the time would be art history. And he had graduated at least 5 years earlier, and I'd totally forgotten about him. I remembered his name when I got this postcard. I could picture him. So I got this postcard from Madrid. He said, "Dear Mr. Bateman, I'm in Madrid. I've been to the Prado, and I couldn't agree with you more about the lower left corner of Fra Angelico's Annunciation." Now that's kind of staggering at first thought, until I tell you that's a very special corner. Fra Angelico here, the teacher's coming out, forgive me. Fra Angelico was a transition between medieval and Renaissance. He was a very early Renaissance painter in Florence. I'm pretty sure it's Florence. And so the Annunciation is where Gabriel is coming to Mary to tell her she's going to have a baby. And so the Gabriel and Mary and the portico that Mary is in is three-dimensional. So that's Renaissance, it's sort of realism. But the background is flat, medieval style, like stained glass windows or tapestries. And the lower left corner looks like a flat tapestry, but it's the wildflowers of Tuscany. And it's really beautiful. Delineated wildflowers on a kind of a black background. And it's not at all realistic, but you can identify all of those different species of wildflowers of Tuscany in that lower left corner.
But it's still flat.
It's still flat. It's medieval. That's right. So this is what I'm getting at. So this kid had been brainwashed by me, and I think it's a tragedy that we have this. I've heard some thinkers argue it's it's the canon of our culture, in literature, in music, in art, so much to do with our culture, history, geography, and so on, which I would also include in it, that is gone. There's a whole generation of educators who considered this as passé. You don't learn by rote. When was the last time kids did memory work? I can still quote you poems that I learned in high school that I find really, really important to me. And sometimes even in times of stress and trials and tribulation, well, I sometimes do the 23rd Psalm. But there's one poem, can I have the liberty to quote one poem here?
By all means.
I don't know if you've heard of...
I'm the same.
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard of Charles G.D. Roberts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He's a New Brunswick guy. He was Sir Charles G.D. Roberts. And he wrote wonderful short stories of wildlife. And I probably read every one of his books every year. I'd borrow them from the North Toronto Public Library. Well, he wrote some poetry, and I can't remember the title of this poem, but I learned it in grade 8, and it was really tough to learn because it was blank verse. I mean, some of the verses along the line of purple hills, the crimson forest stands, and all the day the blue jay calls throughout the autumn lands. That's a bit kind of doggerel. That's not Charles D. Roberts.
No, I was going to say it's Archibald Lampman.
Archibald Lampman, that's right.
Yeah.
No, this is, it brings tears to my eyes and a lump to my throat still. It's so evocative, and it's blank verse. And I only learned the first part of it, and I'll quote a little of the first bit right now. Round the lone clearing, clearly the whitethroat calls, across the marge of dusk and dew-fall stillness. High up in the amber and apple-green sky, a nighthawk swoops and twangs her silver chord. No wind's astir, but the poplar boughs breathe softly, and the smoke of dying brush fires stings the air. Isn't that lovely?
That's absolutely gorgeous. That's absolutely gorgeous.
See, it's here now. Now, who knows what things, would be wonderful in kids' minds, except that generation of educators said, forget about it, it's all about you, write an essay on yourself.
Without knowing anything about what an essay is or how to write it.
Yeah, that's right. And it's all about the world, this luscious world that we're just totally neglecting and erasing. So what kind of stories are the kids that are kids now going to tell to their grandkids?
And erasing it brings us right back to where we started in terms of our relationship with that natural world out there and how it matters and how much we know or how little we know of it and,
yes.
and why we care about it.
Yeah, exactly. See, something else that's missing is a sense of place. I'm a huge admirer of Tom Thompson and the Group of Seven, and they felt deeply in their heart about Algonquin Park and then Algoma after Tom Thompson died, Algoma, Ontario. And you can look at a little Tom Thompson oil sketch, and you can actually tell what week that was painted in the season, because I'm thinking of one about spring breakup with the ice melting, and the far shore you can see that the birch twigs turn pinkish, and the aspen twigs turn chartreusey in that particular week. And so he just knew everything. He painted in bold, thick paint, but he just understood and knew everything, and he deeply loved it. I think now with the kids, they're living in a fantasy world. They're living in a gaming world. They're living in suburbia, which has almost no sense of place. I remember I used to say to my students, who were partly farm kids and partly suburbia kids in Burlington, I used to say I would show a picture of the local shopping mall, and I would say, how do you feel deep in your heart about Roseland Plaza? Well, they would almost bring up. How can they feel deep in their heart about Roseland Plaza? And so if you don't feel anything deep in your heart, you could just, crumble up your chocolate bar wrapper and throw it down. They got caretakers to clean it up. And I would contrast that with a Nigerian village. I lived in Nigeria 2 years while I taught high school in Nigeria. And the Nigerian villages were spotlessly clean. And their central plaza, if you like, with the thatch huts all built from local materials all around, were spotless. If one leaf was lying on the ground, the next time a woman who lived in the village walked, she'd go a little bit out of her way walking past and pick up the leaf. and put it on a rubbish heap. They really cared deep in their heart about their place. I think it's disappearing. If you can't care anything deep in your heart about your place, well, you can trash it. Yeah, you don't care if pesticides go all over the lawns. It doesn't matter.
And that actually applies to the whole world, right?
Yes, it applies to the whole world. Yeah. The world is a place as well. Yeah. And I'm starting to wonder if, kids who have grown up and their main thing they do is go to the mall. They once did a survey, this a few years ago, of 18-year-old American girls about their favorite activities. And far and above everything else, including sex and relationships and romance and being of service to others, whatever it would be, far and above everything was shopping. But this is what we're taught. You listen to almost all the politicians except for Obama. He had a different message. But I pay attention to politics. I wouldn't get involved with it. Oh, Birgit would divorce me if I did. But I get involved and I write nasty letters. And sometimes I write complimentary ones. But if in listening to the political campaigns, both in America and Canada, the message seems to be, vote for me, I'll cut your taxes and put more money in your pocket. Who knows how to spend your money better than you do? So you'll have more money in your pocket and you go to the mall and buy more stuff. And then we'll all live happily ever after. Because everybody thinks shopping is wonderful, it helps the economy, supposedly brings jobs, and it just helps everybody, and you're happy after a day of shopping. And so the message from the politicians is, we can achieve salvation through shopping. Or we can achieve salvation through selfishness. Now that's a Christian message if I ever heard one. And sometimes I hear these right-wing Christians down in the States, including a certain former president. I feel like writing him, I felt like writing him a letter back when he was president saying, can this be a Christian message, a salvation through shopping and selfishness? But I was told he doesn't read, so I actually didn't send him the letter. And it's pointless anyway.
The opposite of what you're describing here, because the other thing about shopping is, of course, immediately it's short term, and one of the facts I learned not that long ago is that 99% of what we take from the earth is garbage within 6 weeks of purchase.
Wow, I remember that. 99%.
It's actually 90 of what we take from the earth, 93% is discarded before it gets into a production line, like that slag and waste, waste heat and all that sort of thing. Wow. 93%. Of the 7%, of the 7%, 80% is waste within 6 weeks. It's just it's wrapping, it's packaging, it's consumables, it's gasoline, it's and what's left after 6 weeks as durable consumer goods is 1%, and it's only going to the dump a little slower. It's still going to the dump.
Yeah, right? That's right. I got to remember that.
Tearing up the earth in order that 99% of it can be destroyed.
And yet human population is going up, and everybody in the world, especially China, expects more of that same stuff. And here's a thought for you, that every time I see and hear an economist on TV or radio talking, well, the big problem now, and Obama's biggest problem, all politicians' biggest problem, is jobs. Where are all the jobs? René Dubos said, the most important thing for a human being is meaningful work, next to the family. And now families seem to mean less. And we seem to have got rid of the idea of work, of meaningful work. So here's the thought. We have dug ourselves into a deep hole of overproduction and underemployment. And when we ask the experts, how do you get out of the hole? Their answer is, dig deeper. Yeah. They say, produce more, become more efficient, produce more stuff, and fire more people, because that would increase your efficiency and increase your unit production per worker. And so fire more people, and then the stock prices go up and the CEO gets a few $1 million bonus, etc., if you fire more people because you increase the profitability. So last time I checked, the best way to get out of a hole is to stop digging first. And we're only digging deeper. Why do we need more production? We're over capacity now. What do we need more of? Do we need more cars? Do we need more soybeans? Do we need more wheat? Do we need more dairy products? Do we need more manufactured textiles, blue jeans, shirts? What do we need more of? What we need more of is meaningful work. And nobody's facing this elephant in the room. And it's getting worse because we're having more people and we're expecting more of the Earth's resources to go into this stuff. And yet we're getting less jobs.
Now, this is the very opposite of thinking like a mountain, which is the title of one of your books.
It is, yeah.
What's thinking like if we were thinking like a mountain, how would it be different?
Yeah, well, if you're the quote comes from Aldo Leopold, his Sand County Almanac, and he said if you think about if you think like a mountain, you think about the entire picture of what's going on the mountain, and the mountain, I guess you can metaphorically say, is protected by the forest, and the forest would get eaten by all the deer if there's deer overpopulation like there is here. And so we need wolves to keep the deer in check. And so if you're thinking like a mountain, you're thinking about the closed system of checks and balances that you have in nature, one thing harmonizing with the other, so the whole thing is in some kind of sensible equilibrium, or we're going to keep on, losing and creating erosion and going downhill.
Yeah, so that's exactly the opposite of
this overproduction. Yes, exactly.
This is producing enough, and caring for it enough, and having the checks and balances to, as you say.
That's exactly right. And we need to have a different way of judging our success and judging our quality of life, and we need to wake up and stop being this way. There are some good signs that some members of the younger generation, in spite of me saying a lot of them just all they want to do is go shopping, there are more great kids now than I think there have ever been in history, in our society anyway. And I think in a lot of societies, in Iranian society, in Chinese society. And they're speaking out, and they're using what I think is one of the most dangerous things, electronics. But they're using electronics in very positive, wonderful ways of connecting with each other. This one thing that happened, remember this beautiful woman that was killed in the protests in Iran, in Tehran, protests over the election. Somebody used their phone to film her, and within an hour or two, it was viral all over the world. And man, did it put the Iranian powers in their place and told the world what's happening there. So, and there's tremendous interconnection now from village to village in India, and great people like Vandana Shiva can spread her word and get it out there due to some of this modern technology. So there's a lot of great stuff happening, and I know more kids that are terrific kids, that most of them are, the ones that I know personally are friends of my kids and their friends and that sort of thing, and they're doing a lot of good out there.
There's a terrific generation in the universities right now, just that university age group,
Yes.
And very dedicated to turning this whole battleship around in a more positive direction, and very imaginative about how to do it. And
Jeremy Rifkin has just come up with a book, The Empathic Civilization, and he's going around flogging it, I guess you'd say, and I've heard him a number of times being interviewed by different people, and he's based a lot on what's happening in Europe, which he thinks is miles ahead of us, and I agree with him, on having a more balanced society. And he says there's a great constituency of young people who don't want to just keep acquiring more stuff. They don't want to have 3-car garages. They may not even choose to have a car. Many of my kids' friends have chosen not to have a car. Our kids are not going to have a TV, at least until their children are a lot older. They say no child should even see a television set going under the age of 3. and they should be very curtailed in their TV viewing. But what they're interested in is sharing. Like they share music files, and sharing stories, and sharing, you know, all kinds of things. They would rather have a high quality of life for everybody than their parents, than the baby boomers, and our generation, depression babies and so on.
Yeah. Well, that brings up another very closely related thing, I think, which is you've also felt very strongly about the dissolution of community and family bonds, and felt that that was related to a lot of this this multifaceted crisis that we're facing.
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to, well, I saw it happen. My first year of teaching was 1955. That was the first year, incidentally, that Elvis Presley was on the Ed Sullivan Show on coast-to-coast television.
From the waist up.
Yeah, from the waist up. And incidentally, something else has gone, is the whole family sitting down together and watching the same television show. Mm-hmm. The kids have their television shows, the parents have their television shows, the grandparents have their television shows, I guess. And so there's been quite an effort from the 1950s to separate teenagers as a block that can be targeted for market purposes. And they've been trained to like special foods, special clothing, special music, particularly that adults can't stand. So clothing adults don't like, music adults can't stand, foods that adults don't approve of, and so on. And these poor teenagers are sitting ducks for the smartest advertisers and promoters in the business. And they use sex and avarice or greed and a fascination with violence, which appeals to those that have testosterone in particular. And so they hit those buttons to sell a product line. And it's incredibly successful. And I think E.F. Schumacher said, if you systematically emphasize human failings, you know, lust and greed and fascination with violence, systematically keep piling it on and piling it on, what do you expect? It's a miracle the kids are as good as they are, and a lot of them aren't. So I think it started then, this whole thing toward self-indulgence and toward going shopping and marketing and all that kind of thing, and having the kids feel alienated. They're crafted to be that way because they make a better market target. And once the teenagers are rolling, then they try to convince the 8-year-olds they're teenagers already. And we see this happening where kids want to be teenagers as soon as they possibly can. They admire that. And then they push it on to the 35-year-olds, so they're still think they're teenagers. So for the first time in the history of our interesting species, Homo sapiens, we have, we'll say, from the age of 10 to the age of 30, the most vital time of life dedicated to self-indulgence and amusing oneself. Now there's a cartoon I have to describe, which I haven't actually seen. Someone told me about it. There's two boys sitting on a stoop, and I guess they're early adolescent. One boy turns to the other and says, "What are you going to be if you grow up?"
Wow.
Now, this can be taken two ways. First of all, it's not funny. One way, maybe the kid is maybe he's going to die because he's got obesity and early onset diabetes and early possibility of heart attacks. They say this is the first generation for centuries, really, where this generation will not outlive, many individuals will not outlive their parents. They'll die before their parents do, for health reasons of bad health. Maybe they'll commit suicide. Maybe they'll be suffering from depression. Maybe they'll be doing an overdose of drugs. Maybe they'll kill themselves in a car crash from over-drinking. So there's huge risks to that kind of way of life, of lifestyle. The average 14-year-old in North America now, last year, spent 7.5 hours every day, 7 days a week, they don't take the weekend off, looking at screens. Not relating to flesh and blood friends and relatives, and not going out in nature, not going for walks or hikes, staring at a screen, 7.5 hours, 7 days a week. That's almost like an 8-hour working day. It's kind of a normal working day.
But we don't normally work 7 days a week.
No, that's right. So what kind of voters are those kids going to be if they grow up? And by the way, if they reach the age of 50, we'll say, their brains may still be 13, 14 years old because they got rewired when they were 11 on video games. And video games do rewire your brain, especially if it's got too younger. I mean, if they're using these games younger. So they may still be adolescent. So I say again, what kind of voters are they going to be? What hope is that for voting for environmental laws and for higher taxes to protect things and have better, policing for for our agriculture and health and so on? What kind of parents are they going to be? So to me, it's a way worse threat than terrorism. This threat of the electronics and screens and garbage therein.
Well, there's a whole complex of things, right? That are all running in the same direction and that are all having the same destructive effects. I mean, the dissolution of the family, the dedication of the advertisers to isolating the individuals, particularly the young individuals. Yeah. And all of that's got to relate back to this whole environmental question, right?
It does relate to the whole environmental question. I remember I've been giving talks and ranting away. I keep sort of fine-tuning and also based on new information, adding to what I rant about. But I remember I started giving talks in the 60s. And probably by the mid-60s, early 70s, I was talking about this Homo sapiens teenager consumerensis, which is a central chapter in my book, Thinking Like a Mountain. Mm-hmm. And I think it's central to the way things are going. I remember saying to audiences in the 60s and 70s, perhaps the adults, the parents of the future's idea of family values will be based on the Flintstones, because they were babysat by television. They didn't see families interacting and having dinner together and going on hikes together and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So now maybe my prediction's coming true. Maybe the parents of these kids now that are all their time on electronics, they were raised on TV. So it's okay. And what is happening, there's a fantastic book. It's been out about 5 years, maybe 10 at the most, called Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And it's by Richard Louv, L-O-U-V. And he's a San Diego journalist, an investigative reporter. And he quotes recent statistics. They're doing all kinds of studies on this now because there's a lot of people worried about it. Where if kids just play around out in nature as you did growing up and as everybody in our generation did, and many people in younger generations did as well, and all people through history all played around out in nature when they were little kids. So if the little kids play around the majority of their time out in nature, say they're on a computer 3 or 4 hours a day, but they're playing around out in nature 3 or 4 hours a day, that's okay. I mean, it would be better if they play around in nature more. But if they play around in a significant amount, that's climbing trees and making ditches in the little dams and chasing through the bushes and all that kind of stuff. Here's what happens. You have less attention deficit disorder, and think of all the Ritalin and stuff like that kids take. Less obesity, obviously. Less drug abuse, less alcohol abuse, less depression, less suicide, less bullying, and higher marks.
Really?
It's like magic. All of those things happen, and in varying degrees, of course. And nature's right there, and it's free. And I grew up in the city of Toronto, and I had a bike, and we had the TTC, the Toronto Transportation Commission. We could take the buses and streetcars, and it might take us an hour or so to get to nature, but we had no problem getting to nature. Mm-hmm. I don't know of a city offhand, including Delhi in India and Calcutta and other places, where you can't get out into nature if you want to. Mm-hmm. So there's really no reason for that. But now I read in Richard Lou's book that mothers are afraid to let their kids play outside. So a fairly large number of mothers. And every time I say this to an audience, I see a whole number of heads in the audience going, they're afraid to let their kids go outside. I heard of one who another woman in her neighborhood was more sensible, and she let her kids go out and play in the little woodlot at the end of the street. And this woman phoned 911 to have the police come and charge this woman with child abuse, because she was letting her kids play outside and endangering them. Well, I got news for her and all of those that think that way. Playing outside is perfectly safe. There's some risk in being alive, but the risk is negligible. Most dirty old men who are going to hurt kids are known to the family. 95% or so. They're the father, the uncle, the man across the street. And anyway, a dirty old man is not going to hide behind a bush at the end of the street for 6 months waiting for a lone kid to walk by. They hang out near schoolyards or some other place, perhaps, if they do. But I don't think there's statistically any more than there used to be in that, and kids always played outside. And here's the clincher. Most kids, all kids, play in groups. At least I always did. And I've never heard of a group abduction. So 3 and 4 and 5 kids, buddies horsing around, playing around outside. It's, the last group abduction that I heard of was the Pied Piper of Hamelin. And I don't think there's been one since. So, however, there's no danger out of doors, there's danger indoors. If the kid's sitting all the time on these electronics. Have you ever heard about internet predators? Have you ever heard about internet bullying? Ever heard about internet pornography? Do the parents know what's going on inside the house? They don't need adult supervision outside. It's nowadays, you go to parks, the parks are empty. There's a sign with these triangular yellow signs saying slow children playing. Someone I heard recommended you should stroke out the word slow and write no children playing. The parks are empty. The number of kids going to visit national parks in Canada and the States is falling. And the population is going up. But visiting parks, it's falling. I spoke to a Parks Canada official who's stationed in Jasper, and he was describing families driving from the Banff-Jasper Highway, which is arguably the most beautiful highway in the whole world. Spectacular beauty. And he says, whole families drive that highway and the kids don't look out the window. They're busy looking at screens in the back seat. I just about died when I heard that. So it's to me it's like a great big monster that's rolling over us as a society, and it's hard to know what to do because all of this electronic stuff is so seductive and it's so quick, and it's changing the way kids think and behave and act and everything. It's frightening, but there's a whole army of people out there trying to do something about it. But the schools are no use. Schools chopped outdoor education budgets, most of them. When I was a teacher, I would, Birgit and I were teachers together at the same school, and this high school in Burlington, we had budgets to have one canoe trip in Algonquin Park for every kid. And it was just wonderful, a whole week in Algonquin Park. And we found that complete idiot, they're 99% 100% boys, I guess usually. They want to cause trouble. They're acting up on the canoe trip. At the beginning of the trip, would be transformed into caring human beings by the end of the trip, just by being out there in the way I would love to see every single North American high school kid every single year have 1 week or 2 weeks in a small group out in nature. No electronics, no junk food, just you relating to your buddies and setting up camp and traveling through nature. It would transform the character in a good way of all of North America.
How could you get there?
With budgets. It's
primarily a financial issue?
There's two issues. Budgets, and a new issue that's come up like a great nightmare is liability. It's why I've practically given up on the school system because of they've cut the budgets for the sensible things like music and possibly drama. I don't think everybody should take art in high school, just the ones that really want to. But everybody should know about art and music and drama and literature and that sort of thing, history. But they cut the budgets for those things. They cut them out as frills. And they buy more computers. You don't need to buy computers for kids. They have computers and they're smarter than the teachers are some of the time, or probably a lot of the time, on the computers. That'll come naturally. What you do, you need to concentrate on getting kids out of doors. But the other thing is liability. When I was a teacher in the 70s, 60s and 70s, I remember I taught art, even my degree's in geography, and I had a little clique of my favorite kids. I was their favorite teacher, they were my favorite kids, and they just hung out in the art room after school. And we talked and gossiped and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes it would be a nice day, and I'd say, hey, it's a nice day, why don't we all go cave climbing up in Mount Nemo, which is about 20 minutes north of the school on the Niagara Escarpment. So I'd say, okay, I got a van, I can fit 6 in my van, but there's 10 of us here, and a girl would pipe up and say, well, my boyfriend has a car, he's at football practice, I'll get his keys. So then we jump in his car, no permissions, none of that stuff. And we'd all just go up and go down in the depths of the caves of Mount Nemo. I never counted the kids, I had no idea if they all came back home or not, but I never got any complaints from mothers. But nowadays, I talked to an outdoor educator from Edmonton who has been in the business 30 years. Last time he took kids ice fishing, which he's done for his whole career, he had to fill out, I think he said 94 pages of forms before he could get permission to take them. Well, how far apart are the holes? How thick is the ice going to be? Well, how does he know? What courses have you taken in hypothermia? All this stuff, hoops he had to jump through before he could do this simple ice fishing trip. And it's absolutely pathetic. And there are ways out, but we need to have legislators and lawyers and teams of educators and parents working to reduce this liability risk, because the insurance companies are killing us in this respect, and then in this fear that's being permeated and encouraged through the fear of terrorism and all the other. Fear seems to be the big other thing that goes along with our new society. And it's needless fears of playing outside. It's ridiculous.
There's actually, I think, some pretty good research that shows that the level of fearfulness that people have is directly related to the amount of time they spend watching television.
Yes, I wouldn't.
The television portrays a frightening world, and and portrays abnormal events as normal. And
but here's another thought: you cannot. This is, I think, is an axiom. You cannot build resilience in a developing child without risks. They have to take risks, and by risks, I don't mean risks on World Warcraft. I mean, genuine. How are you climbing up this cliff, and are you going to fall off? And how do we do the engineering for our tree fort? We put in horizontals, and you stand out here, it's going to fall down. So you need to do a little, a diagonal, etc. Yeah. That's experiential learning, and you must have risks. You must expect risks, carefully measured and not overboard.
But it's something as a culture we really have run away from. I don't mean just risks for kids, but all kinds of risks. I mean, the insurance companies, as you say, are having such powerful impacts on even things like how you build and maintain your house. Whether you can have an oil tank.
That's right. And so parents think it's safe to keep their kids locked up looking at a screen. That's one of the most dangerous things they can do. If you're at all concerned about depression, suicide, overdose of drugs, obesity, heart attack. It's extremely dangerous. We're playing with fire. That's very, very risky. What's going on inside these sweet little houses that think they're so safe.
Another remark of yours that cuts against all of that tendency is your remark that art opens our eyes. And maybe it seems to me that that's got to be one of the things that you would hope your work would be doing in the schools, because you've done quite a lot of work for young people, right?
Yeah, I think art opens the eyes. I think doing art opens your eyes and my eyes and her eyes and his eyes. Looking at art can do it too, but also reading poetry can do it, and reading a novel can do it, and listening to an interview on the CBC can open your eyes, and good journalism is an art too. Watching a superb television program. I think TV is a double-edged sword. I think usually people watch garbage. You look at most of the stuff on TV. Reality TV is the opposite to reality. We need reality TV, and by that I would mean a David Attenborough show. Mm-hmm. The Blue Planet, or I've forgotten the names of his different series. There's so many wonderful shows on about nature now. Just mind-boggling, beautiful shows. So, you know, my painting may have some small effect on some people, but I don't expect it to, and I don't do it for that reason. I think TV is a far more powerful medium, mm-hmm. and photography and other things, and even going out and taking your own photographs can open your eyes as well. Mm-hmm. So yes, art opens the eyes, but not just in that narrow way of going and looking at somebody's paintings. Mm-hmm.
I'm struck as we talk by the fact that I think you just love your life. I think you love what you do.
Well, listen, I think I'm the luckiest guy that ever lived. Maybe you think you are, but as far as I know, I'm the luckiest guy that ever lived, because we live in the luckiest generation to have ever lived. Those of us that were born in the 30s had opportunities opening, doors opening at every turn as we move through life. Mm-hmm. And I consider it a privilege to have been in World War. I wasn't in it. I was 15 when the war ended, World War II. But to have seen that and experienced it and seen real family farms and you know, to have had rationing and to just have total family life, and going to our summer cottage where we didn't have electricity and we had an ice box and we had to go and get the ice out of the ice house and take it down the lake and wash off the sawdust and then heave it up with the tongs and put it into the ice box, etc. So I've lived through a whole lot of different eras. My mother was born before oil. I happen to agree that we're practically at the end of oil, or at the end of peak oil, and my mom grew up in an upper middle class family in Spring Hill, Nova Scotia. Her dad had a woodworking company there, but it was she was born in 1899 December, but we'll say 1900, and the travel was by horse and buggy, horse and sleigh, on foot, or by sail. And they cooked by fire, etc., lit by fire, by flame. And she saw a man walk on the moon. And so she saw huge changes. She saw all the shopping malls and all the stuff that seemed to be in a steady state. My mom died in 1988. And I think by the 1980s, we'd established this pattern. It seems to be a permanent pattern of shopping malls and throughways, and everybody striving for the same affluence, suburbia, and kind of violent movies, and lots of sex out there. Pretty well established by 1980, we'll say, to 2010. That's 30 years. And it's the same, but just more so, in some ways worse.
Yeah.
However, Jeff Rubin would have things to say on this topic, and I happen to be a subscriber to some of his thoughts. But there's another book, in addition to Why Your World Is Going to Get a Whole Lot Smaller. It's called, it's written by an Englishman, Rob Hopkins, and it's called The Transition Handbook: How We Move from Oil Dependency to Local Resilience. And he has a graph in there. Rubin has no pictures in this book. And it goes from the year 0, the time of Christ, to the year 4000, this graph. It's a straight line, of course. In the middle is the year 2000. And starting at 1900, you have this black point sticking up. And according to this theory of projections, the end of the age of oil will be the end of the 21st century, what we're into now. So I've got grandchildren that could see the end of oil. And it could be, and a part of me says bring it on, that my grandkids will be lifestyle will be a lot more like my grandparents than they are like mine. Going up, that ride up has been it's been a delightful ride, but as Oscar Wilde says in The Importance of Being Earnest, come along, Ernest, you've been delightful, but you've been delightful quite long enough. And so it's sort of a possibility that riding down, if we're careful to build in this resilience, and we can have much more harmonious communities, as we did in my grandparents' time. As Ruben says, we'll have farming come back to suburbia, some of the best farmland we've already paved over. Maybe you can jackhammer it up again. We got good climate and flat land in the Niagara Peninsula and so on. You can go to stores in Canada and see made in Canada on the products that you buy in the stores. That'd be a revolution. That'd be really something. Yeah. And the Chinese will have to develop their domestic market, but they can't expect to keep taking jobs away from America and keep expecting to get more customers. That just doesn't add up.
See, if we're to get to that point, to get through this transition that Rob Hopkins talks about, it takes a lot of generosity, takes a lot of intelligent forethought and so on. But what we're actually seeing is a kind of rearguard action against that intelligent forethought by the people who are in the large corporations, particularly the oil companies and people like that. What do you think motivates those people? I mean,
it's interesting. Motivation is interesting because I don't have in my intimate circle these big, rich, powerful guys, but some of them I've met through, in various gatherings, and I actually shook hands with Conrad Black, believe it or not. Happened to be on board the Royal Yacht Britannia, and because we're a supporter of World Wildlife Fund, and Prince Philip had organized a get-together. Brian Mulroney was in the same receiving line anyway. So I think. Okay, I'm gonna go way off, out on a different kind of limb here. I grew up. I was a boy bird watcher and artist. It was okay to be the class artist, but I was a closet bird watcher. Mm-hmm. Didn't advertise in the 40s that I was a bird watcher. Maybe the kids in school now wouldn't advertise if they're a bird watcher either. I'm not too sure if it's cool enough to come out of the closet about being a bird watcher, but being an artist was okay because I did posters for the school dances and the football games and stuff like that. But I always had a strong anti-jock streak in me. That's just me. And I had I never enjoyed competition much. But I think, I've developed a bit of a theory, which is I don't think is even a theory, that testosterone is the cause of many world problems. And I think it's you've heard the term boys with toys. Well, little boys like little toys and big boys like big toys. And the bigger they are and the more whiz bang and whistle they have, the better. I'm sure the guys that are up there at Fort McMurray working on the tar sands, those big machines whose wheels are taller than this room, give them a bit of a thrill. This is my toy. And I'm moving thousands of tons of stuff, and we're bringing in this and that sort of thing. I had a friend of mine who was a spruce expert. Well, he still is a spruce expert. He's retired long ago. And he proved that if you spray for spruce budworm, it's very bad for the spruce because the spruce budworm prefers balsam. And balsam is a junk tree, and spruce is one of the greatest, most important economic products Canada has. So if you keep killing spruce budworm, balsam are allowed to come along, and they're a junk tree, and they shade out the spruce and take over a bit from the spruce. So it's best just to let the spruce budworm go through their phases and not spray. And then you have all the warblers and the other insects and that sort of thing wouldn't be killed either. So I said, oh great, you got to publicize this. He said, no, I can't. Why not? Oh, the ministry would kill me. They'd sabotage all my work, and it would, because everybody loves the spray program. I said, why is that? He said, well, you have to imagine you're up there in the bush, in a small town in the bush, and there's an opportunity to get budgets in and have big spray teams coming in with all their equipment, and you're standing there on the dock and saying, hey, where are them mobile homes? I thought I ordered 50 mobile homes. We only got 20. We got all these guys coming in tomorrow. And the airplanes coming in and taking off again and loading up with the spray. I mean, it's whiz and bang and budgets. It's fun. And the cafeterias all love it, and the local mayor and town council. Everybody loves it. You can't cancel the spray program, even though it's poisonous. In a democracy, that member of parliament is not going to get voted in next time. It's boys with toys. They love it. So that's partly what it is with, I think it's testosterone, and I guess maybe some women like Margaret Thatcher have it too, where they want to beat the other guy. They don't need more money. I mean, you can't eat 12 sirloin steaks a day, or you can't drive 12 Mercedes all at once, so or Bentleys or whatever it is. But it's competition, and it's proving yourself, and it's winning. Mm. I think that's the motivation for it. Mm. And maybe this new generation I was mentioning earlier, some of these kids coming along where they want to share things, and they don't want to beat out other people. And Scandinavia has shown ways, you know, you can care. If you just get richer and richer and richer, then you have to live in a gated community, and there's more crime in the streets. We're spending more money on penitentiaries and drug abuse and all that kind of thing. It's not a world you want to live in.
And we're beginning to draw those connections.
I think so. I think maybe the next generation of entrepreneurs are going to wake up, and there's a lot of actual good-hearted billionaires out there. Ralph Nader's latest book it's a novel or fiction about how billionaires save the world.
It'll be worth reading.
Have you heard of this?
No.
It's tongue in cheek, but he's run it by Warren Buffett and a lot of the big guys, and they say, yeah, the billionaires could save the world. And Warren Buffett and Bill Gates have formed a little core team of putting together the richest human beings in the whole planet to make it $1 trillion. Or maybe it's only 600 billion or something like that dollar war chest for doing good in the planet.
Yeah,
and then there's guys like Anderson, what's his name?
Ray Anderson.
Ray Anderson.
Yeah.
The carpet. What's his name? His carpet company.
Interface.
Interface Carpets. Yeah. So there's lots of corporate guys and businessmen and so on that are seeing the light, and there's still lots of sparks of possibility. People have sometimes asked me, and this could have been a question, you might have it down there, but probably not. Sometimes at the end of when I'm giving a lecture along these lines, I remember somebody up at at Prince George at the University of New Brunswick, University of British Columbia at Prince George. He was either a grad student or a staff member. He said, so how do you handle all this stuff? How do you sleep at night?
The way I had that phrase was, what keeps you from despair?
Right, what keeps me from despair? Yeah. I don't have any despair. I think it's stupid to worry, generally speaking, and I can't say I'm flawless at doing this. Worrying is one of the most stupid, useless activities, worrying about anything. I like the quote from Mark Twain. I told you one earlier. Mark Twain said about growing old, it's a question of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. and anyway, he has another quote. He said, some of the worst problems in my life, is it problems? some of the worst things in my life never happened.
Yes. Yes.
So my recommendation is to postpone worrying about it until you're sure it's going to happen. And then it'll be too late anyway. You'll be into it, and you'll just be like floating through some rapids or something like that. And I firmly believe, although I've never been an alcoholic, I firmly believe in the alcoholic's prayer, and I can't remember the exact wording, but you try to do things that you can do to affect change, improve things, and you don't do things you can't do, and you have the wisdom to know the difference between them. So if you can do something, you can give a speech, make a donation, serve on a committee on some issue that you're troubled by, do it. Global warming is really hard to do something about, so I don't worry about it. I sometimes talk about it, but I don't. I let Al Gore and Suzuki, that's their area of talking, and they're more scientists and experts. So I don't worry about it, and I don't talk about it. I think it's actually, in the case of this, and coming back to nature, and putting a little religion into it, and I'm not a church-going Christian or anything like that, but I did teach Sunday school a little bit. I think it's a sin to waste this life sitting around worrying when it's such a fabulous planet. It is just a fantastic place and a fantastic time in the early 21st century to be alive. There's so many opportunities to do great stuff. And if you can't even do great stuff, one thing I strongly recommend to everybody in the audience, if you're feeling really down in the dumps and over your depth and all that kind of thing, I suggest you walk outside where there's got to be some nature. There's got to be at least a dandelion growing up through a crack in the pavement, or hopefully you can look at a tree. So look at the dandelion or look at the tree. Take 3 deep, slow breaths. Relax your fingertips, relax your toes while you're doing that. And look at the tree and say, thank you. Gratitude is a really, really important thing for yourself. The tree isn't going to hear you. Well, maybe he does hear you, I don't know. But the person you thank, that's not what I'm thinking about. The person who is grateful is the one who benefits. So I think we should be very grateful to all of nature out there, and we should go out and appreciate it and enjoy it. And that's why we're so lucky in this part of the planet.
Robert Bateman, by the way, was 80 years old when we had that conversation, but he had the energy and fire of a man half that age. This is one of a series of green interviews with cultural figures whose works express a deep commitment to the natural world and to environmental preservation. Farley Mowat is another such figure whose interview is already available on this site, and I'll be talking with other cultural environmentalists in future productions. For the Green Interview, I'm Silver Donald Cameron. See you next time.